Have you ever wondered why the pain we try so hard to avoid can end up becoming the greatest teacher in our lives? Maybe you've been through a relationship that left deep scars, and now you wonder if you're still capable of loving again? Is it possible? And more, are you truly ready? It might seem counterintuitive, but what if I told you that it was precisely this pain that prepared you for something greater, more intense, and true? It may sound controversial, but the truth is that scars hurt, but they also teach. So, if you've ever wondered if it's worth taking the risk again, stay with me, because in this video, we'll explore the path back to love and find out if you're ready for this journey.
Wendy was sitting at her desk, surrounded by a pile of documents that seemed to carry the same emotional weight as her life. The office in Houston, which used to be a vibrant place full of laughter, now felt like a labyrinth of loneliness. The walls were adorned with photos of colleagues in moments of joy, but on her desk, only one image stood out, a portrait of her late husband, smiling. The sight of that beloved face made her feel a sharp pain, as if a knife were tearing through her chest. She gently touched the frame, recalling their laughter and the plans they once made together. "How are you, Wendy?" a colleague asked, interrupting her thoughts. Wendy forced a smile. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, but her voice sounded more like a whisper than a statement. The woman glanced at her briefly but quickly looked away, as if Wendy's sadness was a shadow that made her uncomfortable. Wendy knew her colleagues didn't know how to deal with her loss. They avoided contact, as if her pain might be contagious. She sighed, feeling more isolated each day. During the coffee break, Wendy got up, determined to seek some normalcy, though her heart felt heavy. The coffee machine was in a corner of the office, and as she approached, she noticed Mason, a colleague who had always been kind and considerate. He was leaning against the wall, holding a cup of coffee, and when he saw her, he waved with a sincere smile. "Hi, Wendy. How are you today?" Mason asked, his tone light, but there was an underlying concern in his gaze. "Hi, Mason," Wendy replied, trying to disguise her sadness. "Just one day at a time." He observed her for a moment, assessing her state. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. We all miss you, you know?" Wendy hesitated, feeling a knot forming in her stomach. It was so difficult to open her heart, but there was something in the way Mason spoke that made her want to feel seen, even if just for a brief moment. "Thank you, Mason. I really appreciate that," she said, smiling shyly. To her surprise, Mason continued, "I'm planning a happy hour after work. It would be nice to see you there. We could unwind a bit." She found herself hesitating. The idea of going out and having fun seemed almost like an insult to her husband's memory. But at the same time, the thought of staying trapped in her bubble of pain was unbearable. I don't know, Mason. I'm not good at parties. Just a bit of relaxation," he encouraged, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "It's just a small group of friends. If you don't like it, you can leave whenever you want." The offer was tempting. Wendy looked once more at Mason, noticing the sincerity in his eyes. "Okay, I'll go," she said, surprising herself by accepting the invitation. "You have a beautiful smile, you know?" Mason said suddenly, making Wendy blush. She laughed, trying to look away. "Thank you, but I'm not here for that." "Of course you are," he insisted with a playful smile. "You just need to allow yourself a bit more joy. Life is short, and you deserve to be happy." But amid the laughter and conversation, a shadow of guilt followed her. She felt like she was betraying her husband's memory by allowing herself to laugh and have fun. The internal conflict consumed her, but in a moment of vulnerability, she decided to enjoy that night, even though a small piece of her heart was still tied to the past. Wendy woke up the next morning with sunlight filtering through the curtains of her room. The previous night, despite being full of laughter and light-hearted moments with Mason, had left a bittersweet taste in her mouth. As she stretched, the memories of the conversation and the connection she had felt haunted her. She got up and walked to the kitchen, preparing a cup of coffee. The strong aroma of fresh coffee contrasted with the fog of confusion in her mind. As she waited for the coffee, her hands caressed the photos of her husband displayed on the table. "What would you say, love?" she whispered to herself, feeling the weight of longing. She knew she should distance herself from Mason, that it was risky to allow herself this new friendship. The guilt consumed her like a shadow that never left her in peace. I can't do this again, she thought, looking out the window and watching the city's movement. I can't risk my heart. With a deep sigh, Wendy decided it would be best to keep a safe distance from Mason. However, life had other plans. When she arrived at the office, she found him waiting in the hallway, a warm smile lighting up his face. "Hi, Wendy. How are you today?" he asked, with a gleam in his eyes that made her heart race involuntarily. "Hi, Mason. I'm fine. Just thinking about some things," Wendy replied, trying to hide the emotional turmoil that tormented her. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. By the way, I'm working on a project and could use an extra hand. What do you think about helping me?" Mason suggested, his voice full of enthusiasm. Wendy hesitated. The idea of spending more time with him made her nervous, but at the same time, a part of her wanted to accept. "Sure, why not?" she said, deciding that a little distraction might be beneficial. They spent the morning together, immersed in reports and spreadsheets. The light and relaxed work atmosphere provided Wendy with moments of genuine joy. With each shared laugh, the connection between them became more palpable. During a break, Mason turned to her, his blue eyes shining with sincerity. "You know, you're an amazing person, Wendy. I admire your strength." His words touched her deeply. Wendy felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Mason. I don't know if I'm that strong," she replied, the vulnerability in her voice evident. "We all have our battles," he said, with a tone of understanding. "But you've faced yours with courage. That's admirable." The hours passed quickly, and Wendy found herself smiling more than she had in months. However, at the end of the day, a weight still remained in her heart. When she returned home, she sat on the porch, watching the sky darken as the moon appeared. Thoughts of Mason plagued her. Why was she allowing herself to feel this? Was it right? The next day, as she prepared for another day at the office, a part of her mind was still stuck on the conversation from the previous night. What did Mason really think of her? Was he just being kind, or was there something more there? These questions followed her like shadows. When she arrived at work, Mason was waiting for her again, this time with a focused look. "Hi, Wendy. Do you remember the project we were working on? I want to review some points with you." He was so determined and passionate about what he did, and it inspired her. As they sat in a meeting room, Wendy realized she couldn't take her eyes off him. Mason was so focused, so close. It was as if the world around them disappeared. "You really care about this, don't you?" she asked, trying to understand the depth of his commitment. "Yes, I believe that united teams can achieve anything, and I enjoy working with you. You bring a good energy to the team," he replied, without taking his eyes off the papers in front of him. That compliment made Wendy's heart race again. It was a simple compliment, but the way he said it made her feel valued in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, Mason. That means a lot to me." As the days passed, the bond between them grew stronger. Wendy began to open up a bit more. In a moment of vulnerability, she decided to share a little about what she had lost. "You know, sometimes I feel like I'm just existing. My husband was everything to me, and now everything seems so empty," she said, her voice choked. Mason looked at her with empathy. "I can't imagine the pain you feel, but I'm here for you. And you don't have to go through this alone," he said, gently touching her arm, a gesture that made her heart beat faster. Wendy realized that, for the first time in months, she felt a thread of hope weaving into her life. The weight of sadness was still present, but it was beginning to mix with something new, the possibility of feeling alive again. Wendy observed the city of Houston through the window of her office, absorbed in thoughts that seemed like a constant echo of her pain. The city lights flickered like stars in a sky that to her had lost its brightness. She felt trapped in a labyrinth of memories, and every photo of her late husband on the desk seemed like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. It was hard to believe that only a few months had passed since her life changed forever. That afternoon, Mason entered the office with a steaming cup of coffee. He always had a way of entering the room with contagious energy, but that day, his expression was softer, almost cautious. Wendy looked at him, trying to force a smile. "Hi, Mason. What did you bring me?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "A strong black coffee. I thought you could use a bit of energy," he replied, sitting in the chair across from her desk. How are you feeling today? Wendy hesitated, her eyes shifting to the floor. Still trying to adjust, I guess. Mason leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes fixed on hers. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. I'm not trying to push anything, but I want you to know you're not alone. She felt a knot forming in her stomach. It was comforting, but at the same time, the idea of opening her heart to someone new terrified her. Thank you, Mason. It's good to know you care. The conversation flowed naturally between them, as if an invisible barrier had been broken. Wendy began to talk more about her memories, but always with a shadow of sadness hanging over her words. Mason listened attentively, asking questions that showed his genuine interest. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying his memory by having fun, Wendy confessed, her gaze lost in the distance. It's like I'm forgetting who I was. You're not forgetting, Mason said gently. Life goes on, and you deserve to be happy. Your husband would want you to move forward, even if that means finding new joys. Those words resonated with Wendy. Deep down, she knew Mason was right, but the guilt still consumed her. Where would this lead her? She was so used to the pain that the idea of happiness felt almost strange. The days passed, and their friendship began to blossom. Each meeting was a new opportunity to get to know each other better. And although Wendy was opening up, a part of her still hesitated. That afternoon, as they walked through the park near the office, Mason stopped and, with a serious expression, said, "Wendy, there's something I need to tell you." She felt her heart race. "What is it, Mason? You seem worried." I have a secret," he began, looking at the ground. "It's not easy to talk about." "You can trust me," Wendy replied, feeling a wave of empathy. "We're in this together." Mason took a deep breath and looked into her eyes. "It's just that. I don't want this to interfere with what we're building. Sometimes I'm afraid that by sharing it, you'll see me differently." "You can tell me anything," Wendy insisted, a little anxious. "We all have our ghosts." He hesitated, and the tension in the air was palpable. "I promise I'll tell you one day, just not now." He looked away as if he were fighting an internal battle. Wendy felt a chill in her stomach. What could be so terrible that he didn't want to share? The idea of a hidden secret left her uneasy, but she didn't want to pressure him. "It's okay, Mason. I respect your space." But the doubt continued to gnaw at her mind. What was Mason hiding? The connection between them was strong, but the lack of transparency made her question the depth of his feelings. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a soft orange. Without thinking, Wendy moved closer to Mason, and in a moment of vulnerability, their lips met. The kiss was intense, loaded with emotions that bubbled up inside her. It was a mix of desire, fear, and a faint taste of freedom. When they pulled away, Wendy looked at Mason, her heart racing. "What was that?" she whispered, guilt washing over her again. Mason watched her, his expression confused. I don't know. It just happened." The two stood in silence, the tension between them palpable. Wendy felt lost. The connection was strong, but the shadows of the past and Mason's secrets threatened to destabilize everything they were building together. She needed clarity, but the confusion in her heart seemed more intense than ever. Wendy hesitated at Mason's proposal for the work retreat. The idea of stepping away from routine and immersing herself in a new environment scared her, but his insistence was reassuring. He looked at her with an encouraging smile, his clear eyes reflecting an understanding that few could have. "Wendy, you need some time for yourself. I promise it will be good. We can work together, and who knows, maybe you'll feel lighter." "Do you really think this will work?" Wendy questioned, her voice mixing hope and skepticism. I don't know if I'm ready for this." Mason leaned a little closer, his expression serious. "Sometimes we need to step back to see better, and I'll be there with you, so you don't have to worry." Wendy felt a familiar warmth spreading through her chest. The idea of having someone by her side again, someone who cared, was tempting. She accepted, and soon they were on their way to the retreat, a place surrounded by lush nature, far from the hustle and bustle of Houston. When they arrived, the fresh air and birdsong brought Wendy a sense of renewal. The environment seemed to invite her to open up, to leave behind the burdens that weighed her down. On the first day, after some group activities, Mason and Wendy found a secluded spot by a lake. The sun reflected on the calm waters, creating an almost magical scene. Wendy, sitting on a rock, looked at the reflection of a woman she no longer recognized. "It's so beautiful here," she commented, her voice soft, almost like a whisper. Mason sat beside her, their shoulders lightly touching. "It is. Sometimes we need a place like this to remind us of what really matters." The conversation flowed naturally, and as they talked, the emotional barriers Wendy had built began to crumble. I lost my brother a few years ago," Mason revealed, looking at the lake. "It was hard, you know? He was everything to me. I always wondered if I could have done something different." Wendy felt deep empathy as she heard the pain in Mason's eyes. "I know how that feels," she said, her voice choked. "I lost my husband so suddenly that I still can't process everything. It's like I'm in a nightmare I can't wake up from." "You're not alone, Wendy," Mason replied, placing his hand gently on hers. "We're here for each other. That's a big step in dealing with loss." His touch made her feel a mix of comfort and vulnerability. Wendy looked at their intertwined hands, and for a brief moment, the guilt that haunted her diminished. The connection between them seemed real, and she allowed herself to dream of a future where she could be happy again. In the following days, they spent more time together, sharing memories and anecdotes from their lives. They laughed, cried, and supported each other, creating a bond that seemed to strengthen with each conversation. But as they neared the end of the retreat, a shadow of worry began to form in Wendy's mind. One afternoon, while Mason stepped away to take a call, she picked up her phone, expecting a message from her mother or friends. However, an unexpected notification appeared on the screen. It was a message from a woman named Clara, with a text that made her feel a chill down her spine. "Mason, I need to talk about us. I can't keep hiding this." Wendy's heart raced. What did this mean? What was Mason hiding? She couldn't process the emotions that flooded her. What she had built with Mason could be an illusion. As soon as Mason returned, Wendy decided she needed to confront him. "Mason, can we talk?" she said, her voice trembling. He immediately realized something was wrong. "Sure, what's up?" Mason asked, his expression turning serious. I just saw a message on your phone from someone named Clara," Wendy began, feeling the knot in her throat tighten. "What's going on between you two?" Mason hesitated for a moment, and his facial expression changed. "Wendy, I can explain," he tried, but the urgency in his voice didn't calm the storm brewing inside her. Without waiting for an answer, Wendy stood up, her heart racing, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down her face. The vulnerability she had felt during the retreat now seemed like a distant dream. She needed answers, and whatever existed between Mason and that woman might be the key to her happiness or her ruin. Wendy sat at her desk in the office, her heart heavy as she looked at her phone. The message she had found on Mason's phone echoed in her mind, like an incessant echo that made her feel betrayed and confused. She couldn't understand how the trust she had begun to build with him could crumble so quickly. The day seemed endless, and each minute dragged on as if time was mocking her anguish. Finally, she decided she needed answers. With her breath unsteady and her hands trembling, she got up and walked to his office. The proximity made her nervous, but the determination to clarify the situation was stronger. When she entered, she found Mason analyzing some documents. He looked up, surprised to see her there. "Wendy, are you okay?" he asked, noticing the heavy expression on her face. "I'm not. We need to talk," she replied, her voice firm but trembling. He nodded, and they both sat down. Wendy wasted no time. "I saw the message on your phone, Mason, the one saying you were meeting your ex. What's going on between you two?" Her voice was a mix of challenge and pain, and the words came out like a blow. Mason frowned, visibly surprised and concerned. "Wendy, I can explain," he began, but her expression interrupted him. "Explain what?" "That you're still involved with her." Wendy's voice rose, full of emotion. "I thought we were getting closer, that I could trust you." "You can trust me," Mason exclaimed, standing up from his chair. "The truth is, I'm helping Sarah. She's going through a tough time, and I didn't want to leave her alone." "And that justifies the messages?" Wendy stood up, her eyes shining with indignation. "I don't want to be the second option, Mason. I'm not an alternative while you try to resolve your past issues." The tension hung in the air, and Mason took a step forward, trying to touch her arm, but Wendy pulled away. "I don't want this anymore. I need some time," she declared, her voice firm, but the vulnerability evident in her eyes. "Wendy, please, don't do this. You need to understand." Mason began, but she was already leaving the room, her mind swirling with pain and confusion. The next day, as she tried to focus on work, her phone rang. It was an unexpected call from an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered. "Hello, is this Wendy?" A female voice sounded on the other end, and immediately a chill ran down her spine. "Yes, it's me. Who's this?" "My name is Clara. I'm Mason's ex-girlfriend. I needed to talk to you about him." Wendy felt her stomach turn. What else could she hear? "What do you want to tell me?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "I know you two are seeing each other, and I need you to know that Mason is only helping me. He doesn't want anything with me. I'm a closed chapter in his life," Clara said, with a sincerity that touched Wendy in a strange way. Wendy took a deep breath, her mind agitated by the revelations. "But he didn't tell me that. He didn't say anything about you," Wendy said, her frustration overflowing. "He's a good friend and always has been. I'm going through a difficult phase, and the last thing I want is to cause problems in his life or yours. I just thought you should know," Clara continued, and Wendy could hear the concern in her voice. The call ended, and Wendy sat in silence, her mind racing. She was torn between anger and understanding. The situation with Mason was more complicated than she had imagined, but what did she really want? She sat at her desk, a diary of her late husband in front of her. He had written about love, pain, and the importance of living fully. As she read some pages, the words seemed to leap off the page. "Life is too short to be driven by fear. Love intensely, even if it means getting hurt." Wendy closed her eyes, feeling a wave of emotions wash over her. The pain of loss was still fresh, but she also knew she couldn't live only in the shadows of the past. If Mason was willing to fight for her, perhaps it was time to face her own fears. "I deserve to be happy," she whispered to herself, determination beginning to take shape. She needed to find a path that would lead her to the light again, even if it meant confronting the truth about Mason and what she truly wanted for herself. Wendy walked into the bar with her heart racing and her mind swirling. The soft lighting and the murmur of conversations around her contrasted with her internal turmoil. She spotted Mason at the back of the place, his gaze focused on a glass of whiskey. He seemed distant, lost in thought, and Wendy felt a pang in her chest as she approached. "Mason," she said, her voice firm but trembling. He looked up, surprised to see her there. "We need to talk." "Wendy," he replied, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I came because I'm tired of your lies. You need to tell me the truth about your ex." The tone of her voice was sharp, as if each word was loaded with repressed emotion. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she knew well. "It's not what you think. I never stopped caring about you." "And what about her? Were you helping her get through a crisis, or was it just an excuse to be near her?" The question shot from her lips like a bullet, each word tinged with pain and frustration. "Wendy, please, listen to me," he pleaded, his eyes searching hers. "She was going through a tough time, and I just wanted to help. That doesn't mean I stopped loving you." "Loving? Do you think you can still use that word? After everything?" Wendy's voice dripped with bitterness. "You made me feel like I could trust you, and now this." Mason closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather courage. "The truth is, I never stopped caring about my ex, but what I feel for you is different. It's real. I didn't know how to handle it, and the last thing I wanted was to hurt you." Wendy felt a wave of anger and pain mixed together. "So you used me as a remedy, an escape for your pain?" She couldn't hold back the tears. "I'm not a second choice, Mason." He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. "You have no idea how much I fought against this. I just wanted to do the right thing, but I got lost along the way. Forgive me." Wendy's anger was growing, and the idea of forgiveness seemed distant. "Forgiveness? You want me to forgive you for making me believe in a love that might have been an illusion?" In an impulsive move, Wendy decided she needed a way out. "You know what? I'm going to tell your boss about you and your ex. You need to understand the consequences of your actions." She turned, determined, and left the bar, leaving Mason in shock. At her desk at work, Wendy felt like a storm brewing. The decision to tell was impulsive, but she felt it was what she needed to do to free herself from that pain. She sought out her boss, a determined and respected woman, and told her everything, every detail of Mason's relationship, the ex, and how he had deceived her. The boss listened in silence, her expression unwavering. "Thank you, Wendy. This is very serious. I'll deal with it immediately," her boss said, and Wendy felt a mix of relief and guilt. When Mason's dismissal was announced, a wave of satisfaction ran through her, but it soon dissipated, leaving a void. Later, alone at home, Wendy reflected on what she had done. Revenge hadn't provided the peace she imagined. Instead, a sense of freedom began to take hold of her. She realized she needed to free herself not only from Mason, but also from her own emotional chains. "I deserve to be happy," she whispered to herself, her eyes fixed on the window where the sun was beginning to set. Wendy felt a renewal of hope. The decision to restart her life seemed clearer than ever. With new focus, she began looking for job opportunities in another city. Each application was a step toward a future she could shape herself. The idea of leaving Houston intrigued her, but also fascinated her. It was the chance to leave the past behind and open her heart again, not just to love, but to the life that awaited her. Wendy smiled at the thought of her new possibilities. The future was uncertain, but she felt stronger than ever, ready to embrace the freedom she had finally earned. Sometimes, pain is the price we pay for true transformation. Look at your own journey. How have you dealt with the challenges and scars of the past? What are these experiences trying to teach you? Life is full of lessons hidden in the most difficult situations, and each of us has the power to learn and grow from them. Don't let the fear of the unknown stop you from moving forward. If you're ready to turn pain into a new opportunity for love, don't forget to click on the video that's appearing on your screen now. This is, in my opinion, one of the best stories I've ever told, the most emotional. And if you liked what you heard now, without a doubt, you'll love this other story too. So subscribe to the channel, click on the video on your screen now, and see you in a few seconds.